What if no contact, the go-to breakup strategy, was just a stepping stone, and the real path to power was hiding in plain sight? Imagine becoming so powerful and untouchable that when regret finally hits them, they suddenly know they can never be part of your world again. This isn't about cutting them off or waiting in silence. It's about transforming so profoundly that by the time they notice, you're already long gone. What if I told you there's a strategy so psychologically devastating, so potent, that it makes no contact seem weak by comparison? You see, no contact still leaves cracks, open hope lingers, doubt festers, and you're left waiting and wondering. But this new strategy leaves them no escape. They don't miss you simply because you disappeared. They ache because you've become something they can never touch again. This isn't about playing games or waiting by your phone like a lovesick ghost. It's about absolute control, mastery of yourself so complete that when they finally realize what they lost, you're already beyond caring. This is the story of a man who thought no contact was enough, until he discovered something far more powerful. And by the end of this journey, you will wield a weapon so lethal that missing you will be the least of their regrets. Part 1. The Fall from Brokenness to Awakening. He never saw it coming. One moment, she was his world, the late-night conversations, the inside jokes, the deep talks that made him believe their bond was unbreakable. And then, just like that, she was gone. No real explanation, no apologies, just a cold, detached goodbye that hit him like a knife to the heart. He stood there, staring at his phone, rereading her final message 100 times, as if searching for some hidden meaning that could make it all make sense. But it didn't. It never does. In the days that followed, everything reminded him of her. Every room felt empty. Every song on the radio cut him deep. The bed felt too big and too cold without her. His phone's silence was deafening. He could still hear her laughter in his head, still picture the way she used to look at him like he was the only man in the world. Now she looked at him like a stranger. Worse, like he didn't exist at all. That was what burned the most. How easily she erased him, as if all their moments were just another chapter she could close and toss aside. She moved on as if he were nothing more than a brief phase, a name soon to be forgotten, while he was left drowning in heartbreak. His mind became a battlefield, torn between rage and despair. One minute he cursed her name, the next he longed to hold her. He replayed every conversation, every memory, desperately searching for the moment it all went wrong. Had he been too available, too clingy, too imperfect? He tortured himself with questions that had no answers, losing sleep, night after night over a past he could never change. The advice poured in from well-meaning friends. Go no contact, they said. Disappear, make her miss you. It sounded promising, a way to appear strong while secretly hoping she'd come running back. So he tried. He deleted her number, stopped checking her social media, and every time his fingers hovered over her chat to send a message, he forced himself to stop. He told himself he was being strong, that this silence would make her realize what she lost. But despite cutting her off, he couldn't cut her out of his mind. Each day he still woke up hoping to see her name light up his phone. Each night he fell asleep, imagining her coming back, tears in her eyes, begging for another chance. He told himself he was moving on, but in reality he was just waiting for a text that never came, for a door that remained shut. And then, one lonely evening, a brutal truth hit him. No contact wasn't enough. It was a bandage on a still gaping wound. As long as his happiness depended on her returning, he was still broken. As long as he needed her validation to feel whole, he was still weak. And weakness is never attractive. She hadn't respected him when he was on his knees for her, and she certainly wouldn't respect him now if all he did was play pretend at being over it. He finally understood that simply cutting her off would never heal him. This was his lowest point, but also the start of an awakening. He realized that no contact alone was never going to save him. It wasn't enough. Part 2. The truth about no contact, why it's not enough. In that moment of clarity, he saw the truth. No contact is the advice everyone gives you. Vanish and wait, hoping absence makes the heart grow fonder. At first, it sounds like the perfect plan, a kind of silent war where patience is your weapon. He remembered thinking, yes, I'll just disappear and she'll realize I was the best thing she ever had. He imagined the day she'd wake up overcome with regret, the moment she'd check her phone to find nothing from him and feel panic for the first time. But the harsh reality, he learned, most of the time, she doesn't come running back, at least not the way you fantasize. Not if she senses that you're still just sitting there, hoping and waiting. No contact can only work if you truly move on with your life, and most men don't. He hadn't. He was using silence as a tactic, not as real healing. Deep down, he was still stuck on her. And as long as he was secretly waiting, she still held all the power. Women have an almost sixth sense for this kind of thing. They know when a man is genuinely moving forward and when he's just pretending to be strong while watching his phone. Even without speaking, she could probably feel that he was still emotionally chained to her. And if she sensed that he hadn't really let go, she would have no reason to miss him. Why would she? In her mind, she still had him on standby. In many cases, an ex will even toss out a little test after a while. Maybe she'll send a brief, "Hey, have you been?" or casually like one of your posts, just to see if you bite. It's not an accident, it's a probe to check if you're still on the hook. And if you respond eagerly, if you show even the slightest hint that you've been longing for that scrap of attention, guess what? She gets her answer. She walks away feeling even more confident in her decision to leave, because you just proved you were waiting around. To her, you were just a game she'd already won. That's how most men break. They get that small dose of attention, a late-night text or a social media note, and they mistake it for a second chance. Their heart leaps, their hopes skyrocket. This is it. She wants me back. In their excitement, they drop their guard and show their cards. They respond in seconds too enthusiastically, pouring out all the feelings they've been holding in, and in that instant, they undo all their progress. She sees it clearly. He never truly moved on. He was still hers, just waiting to be picked up again. And having confirmed that, she walks away again, leaving him in the ruins of renewed heartbreak. He nearly fell into that trap himself. Nearly. But catching himself at the brink is what saved him. He recognized that no contact was only a surface solution. It created an illusion of strength, but real strength had to come from within. So if just going silent wasn't enough, what was the answer? How could he actually break the cycle? The answer, he realized, was to go beyond silence to a place of genuine indifference. It wasn't about cutting her off from contact. It was about cutting her off from his heart. He would have to become the kind of man she could never reach again, not through petty games or calculated moves, but through true, unshakable emotional freedom. He had to remove the pedestal he'd put her on and learn to stand on solid ground by himself. No contact was just the first step. Now it was time for the real transformation to begin. Part 3. The power of indifference beyond no contact. That night, he made a promise to himself. No more waiting. No more hoping for her to change her mind. If no contact was a bandage, he was ready to rip it off and heal the wound properly. He was done being a slave to the hope of her return. It was time to become truly indifferent, a change so deep that she wouldn't see it coming, and, more importantly, a change that would set him free. He decided to do what most men fear. He let her go completely, in every sense of the word. Not just publicly, but privately, in the deepest parts of his soul. It wasn't enough to stop texting or calling. He had to erase the her that lived in his mind, She would no longer be a factor in his decisions or emotions. Her opinions, irrelevant. Her whereabouts, don't care. Whether she was happy or sad, dating or alone, thinking of him or noted, all had to stop mattering. At first, committing to real indifference felt like trying to quit an addiction. He was so used to checking his phone with every buzz, subconsciously hoping to see her name. So he trained himself to break every habit tied to her. He stopped looking at her social media entirely cold turkey. No more late night just checking her profile. No more scrolling through old photos of them together. Whenever thoughts of her crept into his mind, and they did, often, he learned to catch them, shut them down, and redirect his focus. It was as if he was saying to his heart, "Nope, we're not going there anymore." He didn't make any big announcements about this change. He didn't call her to say, "I'm done with you," or post some dramatic status about starting a new life. This wasn't for her. It was for him. In fact, he realized he didn't even need to block her number or delete every picture to prove a point. Those would still be gestures centered on her. True indifference meant he simply no longer cared enough to bother with any of it. She had become, in essence, a non-entity in his world. As days turned into weeks, something unexpected happened. He started to feel lighter. For the first time since the breakup, he wasn't waking up with a pit in his stomach. He noticed moments, brief at first, then longer, where she wasn't on his mind at all. The silence that had once felt oppressive and lonely began to feel peaceful. By removing her power over him, he was slowly regaining power over himself. Every time he resisted the urge to check on her, every time he redirected a thought about her into energy for himself, he grew a little stronger. He was reclaiming territory in his own head that had been occupied by heartbreak and turning it into space for healing and growth. In this detachment, he found the beginnings of real freedom. He no longer needed to stalk her profiles or ask mutual friends about her. In fact, he found he didn't want to. The curiosity and anxiety that once consumed him were fading, replaced by a calm determination to focus on his life, not hers. He had reached a level of detachment that was quietly profound. He didn't need to prove to anyone that he was over her. He simply was. He didn't need to parade his silence as some kind of tactic, because it was no longer a tactic at all. It was genuine indifference. He had, in effect, become untouchable by her. The man who once would have moved mountains to win her back had vanished. In his place stood a new man who looked at his phone and thought, "Oh, she hasn't called. That's fine. Honestly, it doesn't matter." By embracing this mindset, he became the kind of man she never expected him to be. Someone beyond her reach. He had quietly removed himself from her emotional grasp. Without so much as a word, he had closed a door she didn't even realize could be closed. And ironically, it was exactly this newfound indifference, this calm, quiet freedom, that would set the stage for everything that happened next. Part 4. The dark side of attraction, why they always come back. Meanwhile, on her side of the story, reality was unfolding very differently. In her mind, she had assumed she'd won. When she left him, she figured he'd be crushed and waiting in the wings indefinitely, ready to take her back whenever she might feel the itch to reach out. She thought he'd crumble without her, that he'd be that guy silently pining away, checking his messages a dozen times a day in hopes of a hello from her. At first, she didn't notice much had changed. She was busy enjoying her newfound freedom, going out with friends, living the single life, maybe even flirting with a few new guys. In those early weeks, the thought of him likely didn't trouble her much at all. She assumed, perhaps rightly so at the time, that he was still there in the background, licking his wounds and standing by in case she ever decided to throw him a breadcrumb of attention. But as time passed, something started to feel off. Where was he? He had gone quiet, so quiet that it actually caught her attention. He wasn't watching her Instagram stories anymore, He wasn't popping up in her notifications or asking their mutual friends about her. In fact, it was like he'd dropped off the face of the earth. For someone who expected him to be quietly orbiting her life, his complete disappearance was puzzling, even unsettling. A sliver of uncertainty crept in. She found herself thinking, why haven't I heard anything from him? Is he really just gone? The very silence he embraced for his own healing began to echo in her world as an alarming absence. She started to realize that he wasn't just playing hard to get, was genuinely gone. And that's when a small seed of panic planted itself in her mind. Human nature is funny that way. People often don't value what's readily theirs, but the moment they feel something might be lost forever, they begin to crave it. People are drawn to what they can't have. It's a cruel irony. The less you care, the more they do. She was about to learn this the hard way. At this point, she experienced the dark side of attraction from the other side. The man who had always been an open book, whose love was on full display, had suddenly become a mystery. And nothing is more intriguing than a person who was once at your feet now standing tall beyond your grasp. Her confidence in his devotion began to waver. Doubt, curiosity, and a prickling sense of fear started to grow. She began to wonder, what's he doing? Is he thinking about me at all? Has he found someone else? The power dynamic had flipped, and she could feel it. To her surprise, she missed the attention she used to take for granted. It wasn't necessarily that she missed him, at least not at first. She missed the assurance that someone out there adored her unconditionally, the safety net of his affection. Now that net was gone. So, almost instinctively, she started to reach out in small ways to test the waters. She might have casually liked one of his photos, something she hadn't done since the breakup, just to see if he'd react. Or she sent a trivial text, something like, "Hey, saw something that reminded me of you today. Hope you're doing well." Thinly veiled, low effort, and deniable if necessary, but a test all the same. It wasn't a heartfelt apology or a declaration of missing him. It was a probe, a way to gauge if he was still there waiting. But this time, he didn't play along. When that notification from her blinked on his screen, he didn't jump for joy or rush to respond. In fact, he barely reacted at all. Perhaps he answered politely with a single terse sentence, or perhaps he chose not to respond whatsoever. Either way, his reaction or lack thereof was something she never expected from him. If he responded to her trivial, "Hope you're well" text, it might have been a brief, "I'm good, thanks." Nothing more, no follow-up questions, no emojis overflowing with hidden meaning. If she liked a photo of his, he didn't message her to ask why or treat it as an invitation to talk. He gave her nothing. For the first time since the day she left, she was left unread. She was the one waiting for a reply that didn't come, or receiving a lukewarm answer that closed the conversation instantly. If she had expected to toy with his emotions a little, that plan utterly failed. Instead of the eager, heartbroken man she anticipated, she ran into a wall of cool indifference. And that's when her panic really set in. The roles had completely reversed. Suddenly, she was the one overthinking every little interaction, wondering what he was feeling and why she couldn't get a read on him anymore. Her curiosity from before exploded into full-blown concern and regret. She started overanalyzing his one-word answers and long response times. Was he busy? Was he with someone? Did he truly not care at all? Most men, unfortunately, never get to witness this shift because they fail the test long before this point. They cave in and break no contact too soon, or they respond with too much enthusiasm and show their hand. But not him. He had learned too much, grown too much, to fall into that trap again. He understood that her little outreach wasn't an admission of guilt or a sincere attempt at reconciliation. It was a check-in, a way to reassure herself that he was still an option, and he was determined to show her that he was not. Now she was the one left with restless thoughts. She had thrown out her bait, and he didn't bite. If anything, his lack of reaction only made him more of a mystery. She had expected anger, or hunger, or at least something, but she got nothing. And nothing can drive a person crazy more than nothing when they expect something. By the time she realized what was happening, it was too late for her. She was already on the emotional roller coaster she once put him on. Every day that he remained distant and unfazed, she felt her control slipping. A sense of regret began gnawing at her. The script had flipped. Now, she was wondering if he would ever take her back. That confident belief she had that he'd be there whenever she wanted was crumbling. Here's the ultimate irony. They always come back right when you've stopped hoping they will, not because of some cosmic joke, but because when you genuinely move on, it creates a vacuum of power they can't ignore. She found herself drawn back not purely out of love, but out of a fear and frustration that she had lost a man who had finally learned to live without her. It dawned on her that he wasn't missing from her life because he was sulking or playing games. He was missing because he didn't need her anymore. And that realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Not because she suddenly realized she loved him, perhaps she did, perhaps she didn't, but because she realized she had no effect on him now. He had slipped completely out of her grasp. That's what truly drove her to regret. It wasn't the silence itself. It was the meaning behind the silence. He wasn't ignoring her to punish her. He had simply moved on. This is the dark truth about human psychology. People want what they can't have. The moment she understood that he was genuinely done out of her reach and happy, that's when her regret became real. She began to wish she hadn't let him go, because now he was the one person she couldn't get back. In the end, she found herself missing not just the man he used to be, but the power she used to have over him. And now, that power was gone. They always seem to want to return when they realize they have no power left in your life. Not because your absence made their heart grow fonder, but because your growth made their absence irrelevant. Part 5. The Stoic Transformation, Turning Pain into Power. While she was wrestling with anxiety and unexpected longing, he was busy turning his pain into pure power. This part of the story wasn't even about her at all. It was about him seizing control of his life. The heartbreak that had nearly destroyed him became the fire that forged a stronger man. How? He embraced the pain. Instead of running from it or letting it consume him, he decided to confront it head-on and use it. Every sleepless night and every pang of loneliness was fuel for his transformation. If he was going to hurt, he would make that hurt count for something. He resolved that he would never feel this powerless again. He was going to rebuild himself from the ground up, stronger and more resilient than ever. He started with his mind. The emotional turmoil had shown him how out of control his feelings could get, so he sought out ways to master them. He discovered the ancient wisdom of Stoicism and dove in like a starving man at a feast. The philosophy resonated with him deeply. It taught him that while he couldn't control every event in life, like someone he loved leaving, he could control his reactions. He learned about focusing only on what is within one's control and accepting what is not. This concept became his new mantra. Day by day, he practiced the art of detachment. Whenever memories of her threatened to overwhelm him, he observed them and let them pass, reminding himself that those thoughts held no power except what he gave them. He trained himself to respond to emotional triggers with calm and grace. Where before he might spiral into sadness or anger, now he took a deep breath and stayed grounded. He was becoming emotionally steadier rock where once he had been quicksand. Next, he honed his body. All the time he had spent overthinking and lamenting the past was now rededicated to self-improvement. The gym turned into his sanctuary, a place where he could physically channel his pain and frustration. Every drop of sweat was a drop of weakness leaving his body. Every grueling workout rep was a statement, "I will never be weak again." He pushed himself, day after day. The weights that were heavy last week felt lighter this week. His reflection in the mirror grew stronger, more confident. His posture changed. He stood taller, prouder, The physical changes were obvious: broader shoulders, clearer eyes, a renewed energy in his step. But the internal changes were even more profound. As his mind and body strengthened, so did his spirit. He began to spend time on things that brought him joy and fulfillment. Hobbies he'd neglected were picked up again. New skills were learned. Perhaps he started going to networking events, or joined a class to learn something he'd always been curious about. He expanded his world beyond the narrow focus of the past relationship. Each day was no longer about getting through heartbreak. It was about building a life he was excited about. People around him noticed the change. Friends commented on how calm and confident he seemed. Strangers picked up on his vibe too. There's something magnetic about someone who carries themselves with assurance. He wasn't doing any of this to seek validation. But interestingly, the less he needed approval or attention, the more it naturally came to him. By focusing on becoming a better man for himself, he started shining in a way that others could see from a distance. And yes, that included her. At some point, she caught glimpses of this new him. Maybe a mutual friend mentioned, "Hey, have you seen him lately? He's really doing great." Or perhaps she stumbled on a photo of him smiling, looking fit and happy at an event, surrounded by people. Those glimpses from afar were enough to make her stop and stare. This was not the same person she remembered leaving behind. He didn't just move on. He leveled up. The man he became was so far beyond the broken-hearted version of himself that even if she wanted to, she wouldn't know how to reach him. She had become a mere footnote in the epic story of his rise. And that's the essence of true power. Not seeking revenge, not even seeking someone else to fill the void, but evolving so much that the past simply no longer defined you. Every ounce of pain he had felt was now transformed into strength. The rejection that once threatened to break him became the reason he built himself back better. He turned his heartbreak into an education, learning about himself, about resilience, about what it means to truly value oneself. In that process, he found a sense of purpose and pride that no one could take away, because in the end, the ultimate victory for him wasn't about making her regret her decision, though she did. It wasn't about proving anything to her or to anyone else. The ultimate victory was becoming someone she could never have again. He became the kind of man who exists on a level where her opinions and her choices meant nothing, not out of hatred, but out of growth. She had had her chance to be part of his life, and she chose to walk away. Now, he was living a life so rich and fulfilling that even if she wanted back in, she wouldn't recognize the door, and he certainly wasn't holding it open. He had turned his pain into power, and that power made the past irrelevant. The boy who begged for her love was gone. In his place stood a man who didn't need her love or her at all. And that was worth more than any fantasy of revenge or reunion. It was real, and it was his. Part 6. The silent domination winning without words. One of the most remarkable things about his transformation was how quietly he achieved it. He didn't broadcast his journey of self-improvement to the world. He simply lived it. There were no elaborate social media posts calling her out, no dramatic quotes aimed at making her feel guilty, no obvious, "Look at me, I'm better now," displays. He embraced the art of silent domination winning without saying a word. The old him might have tried to prove a point. Perhaps he would have posted those passive-aggressive quotes about pain and triumph, or selfies at parties trying to show how much fun he was having just to get a reaction. But the new him felt no need for any of that. He wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. His success and happiness were proof enough. His life itself had become evidence of his growth, and it spoke louder than any words. While others wasted time crafting the perfect post to make an ex jealous, he was busy elevating his life for its own sake. He realized a simple but powerful truth. The most dangerous, compelling man in the room is often the one who says the least, but accomplishes the most. So, he kept his head down and continued to do the work. He didn't block her out of anger or spite, because even that would imply he cared enough to hate. He didn't go on a friend-deleting spree or erase every picture of her in some grand gesture. He just quietly moved on. By removing his energy from her completely, he created an eerie calm in the wake of their relationship. It's as if he had never been there at all. No late-night drunken texts to her, no bitter rants to mutual friends that might get back to her, no public drama. He gave her nothing to latch onto, no cracks in his armor to exploit. In doing so, he achieved something powerful. He denied her any validation that she still mattered to him. At first, she tried to shrug off his quiet confidence. She might have thought, he's just pretending. This is an act to get my attention. It was comforting for her to believe that, because the alternative was too unsettling that he genuinely didn't care. But as the weeks rolled on, it became clear his indifference was real. He wasn't watching her stories, wasn't asking about her, wasn't reacting to anything she did. She posted a cute picture from a night out once upon a time. He would have texted something or shown signs of jealousy. Now, nothing. It was like he never saw it, and perhaps he really didn't, since he'd unfollowed or muted her. This lack of reaction began playing games with her mind. She expected, at the very least, some bitterness or pushback. She wouldn't have been surprised if he had bad-mouthed her or tried to flaunt a rebound to get under her skin. Frankly, she would have preferred that over the silence, because at least bitterness would mean he still felt something, but he gave her no such satisfaction. Instead, he greeted her occasional attempts at contact with polite detachment, if he acknowledged them at all. It forced her into an odd kind of reflection. When someone who once loved you suddenly acts as if you don't exist, you're left facing yourself. She started to recall how things used to be, the way he'd drop everything just to see her for 5 minutes, the way he cared so deeply about her moods and feelings, the sweet messages, the unwavering support. He had been always there for her. Until he wasn't. Now, she was confronted with a version of him that behaved as though that intimacy was ancient history. It was as if the breakup had flipped a switch and erased her impact on him entirely. That unsettled her deeply. She found herself replaying in her mind the way he used to look at her, versus the way he looked right through her now. Curiosity gnawed at her. She started bringing him up in conversations. "Have you heard from him lately?" She'd casually ask a mutual acquaintance, trying to sound unconcerned. Some friends, unaware of her inner turmoil, would mention, "Oh, he's doing great. He's been hitting the gym, got a promotion at work. He seems really happy." Each of those updates was like a twist of a knife for her, because they confirmed that he was thriving without her and doing it quietly, without chasing applause. She checked his social media more often now, hunting for clues in his sparse posts or profile updates. But he was a closed book. No emotional outbursts, no cryptic sad songs or pointed memes. Just occasional snapshots of a life well lived, a photo from a hiking trip with a confident smile on his face, a group picture at a friend's celebration where he looked genuinely at ease. No caption pleading for attention, no, "I'm doing amazing," bragging, just living. The more she tried to figure him out, the more frustrated she became. It was like trying to read a novel with half the pages missing. She once thought she knew everything about him, that he was simple and predictable. Now he was complex, unreadable, changed. He felt like a stranger, and yet a stranger she was increasingly drawn to understand. Mystery has a way of becoming magnetic. People don't obsess over what's plain and familiar. They obsess over what's uncertain and confounding. He had, whether intentionally or not, made himself a mystery to her. And in doing so, he occupied her thoughts far more than when he was professing his love at her feet. Yet, the most important part of this silent domination was that he wasn't doing any of it for her. He didn't wake up thinking, "How can I intrigue her today?" Not at all. He woke up thinking of himself, his goals, his plans, his new hobbies, maybe what he'd have for breakfast or what project he'd tackle at work. She wasn't on his agenda, and that was obvious in his behavior, Everything she saw, the confidence, the improved physique, the calm demeanor, all of it, was 100% for him. She just happened to witness it from the sidelines. And that is what made her regret everything, not just leaving him, but underestimating him. She realized she had bet against him, assumed he'd fall apart, and never truly recover. Instead, he became the best version of himself. And he did it without asking for a single ounce of help or recognition from her. In his quiet way, he proved that moving on isn't about who talks the loudest or who shows off the most. Real moving on is silent. It happens in the gym at 6 a.m. when no one's watching. It happens on Friday nights when you're reading or grinding on a side project instead of stalking an ex online. It happens in those small moments when you choose to better yourself rather than bitterly dwell. He exemplified that principle perfectly. By the time she fully grasped the extent of his transformation, her mind was racing with what-ifs, and maybe I was wrong, but the truth was laid bare. He had no intention of giving her any more of himself. And that realization left her utterly shaken. In his silence he had shouted the clearest message of all, "I don't need you." Part 7. The Social Shift. Creating an Aura of Mystery. Interestingly, at one point he had considered disappearing completely from her world, deleting every trace of himself so she could never peek into his life at all. It was tempting to just vanish entirely. But then he realized something more powerful than absence: controlled presence. Instead of going completely off-grid, which she could have easily rationalized as him being hurt or avoiding her out of pain, he chose a different tactic. He would live his life openly, but carefully. He would let her see just enough to feed her curiosity, and nothing more. He understood that if he vanished outright, she might write the narrative for him. "Oh, he blocked me because he's bitter," or "he must still be hurting and can't even bear to see me." He gave her no such satisfaction. He didn't block her. In fact, he allowed her to remain in his peripheral social media circles. But he became unreadable. What she saw of him was carefully curated, not by staging anything fake, but by simply sharing the positive, real parts of his new life and keeping anything personal or emotional completely to himself. Where before he might have been an open book, now he was a captivating novel with most of the chapters ripped out. He might post a photo of a stunning sunset from a hike on a mountain peak, with a short caption like, "Sunday well spent." The photo would show a silhouette of him standing strong against the sky. What it didn't show or say was who he was, with friends, a new woman, alone, why he was there, or how he felt. It just was. A tantalizing glimpse of a life that looked fulfilling, with zero context. He became unpredictable in the social sphere. No more daily status updates or obvious patterns she could decipher. One week he'd be completely silent online. The next, a picture of him at a friend's party would surface, where he looked fit and happy. He wasn't playing games. He was simply living and sharing bits when he felt like it, not to send any message to her, or anyone in particular. But from her perspective, this was confusing as hell. She found herself constantly wondering, what is he up to? Who is that person in the background of that photo? Why does he seem so content? He gave her no answers, and that was deliberate. If she was going to lurk on his profile or ask about him, all she would get would be a view of someone thriving, without any clear storyline to follow. This is the social shift he created. He didn't scrub himself from existence. He evolved in plain sight. He moved in silence, but left tantalizing clues. A snapshot here, a check-in there, each one enough to spark questions, but never enough to answer them. No sappy quotes aimed at her. No obvious rebound romantic posts she could scoff at as fake. Just confidence, presence, and power emanating through the subtle things he did share. And it drove her mad with curiosity. The aura of mystery around him grew with every passing week. She thought she had him all figured out once, that he was simple, that his world revolved around her. Now she couldn't tell what he was thinking or feeling, and it ate at her. When a man changes so drastically and doesn't explain how or why, a woman who once felt secure in his adoration will naturally start to question everything. Is he seeing someone else? Has he completely forgotten me? Was I wrong about him from the start? How could he become so strong without me noticing? These questions plagued her. She began checking his profiles compulsively, hungry for any new tidbit. If he posted a group photo, she'd scrutinize every face to see if someone in it might be a new love interest. If he shared an article or a song, she'd overanalyze the content for hidden meaning about his state of mind. She was, in effect, doing exactly what he used to do about her overthinking and obsessing. The tables had turned so completely, it would have been comical if it weren't so poignant. The more she tried to decipher him, the more frustrated she became. She had expected him to either fall apart or try to show her what she was missing, in obvious ways. Instead, he was just living. And living well, it seemed. It's hard to dismiss someone as pathetic or bitter when every public sign you see of them radiates strength and independence. There's a truth here. People don't obsess over what they understand. They obsess over what confuses them. He had made himself a beautiful confusion. By becoming unpredictable, unreadable, untouchable, he ensured that she couldn't stop thinking about him. Not because he begged her to, but because he gave her mind no closure, no final chapter to close neatly. As far as she could see, he was now an ongoing story, one she wasn't a part of and couldn't influence. And yet, for all this orchestrated mystery, the most potent part of it was that he didn't do any of it for her. He didn't sit down and devise a plan like, I'll post this to make her jealous, then I'll disappear to make her worry. No, he was simply being authentic to his new self. The mystery was a natural byproduct of him living a life where she was no longer the focus. He shared what he wanted, kept private what he wanted, and didn't concern himself with her reactions. He was writing a new story for himself, and she no longer had a copy of the script. If she was intrigued or regretful, that was on her. He wasn't out to hurt her or teach her a lesson. He had outgrown the need to explain himself or prove anything. His life was his, and she had no access to it unless he chose to grant it. That realization is what made her regrets solidify from a passing pang into a deep, lingering ache. She understood at last that he owed her nothing, not even an explanation for how well he was doing. All the things she wanted to know were no longer any of her business, and he wasn't volunteering any answers. Her only window into his world were those tiny social media fragments, and in them he looked fulfilled and, perhaps most painfully, completely unbothered by her absence. That's when she truly felt the weight of her choices. He had moved on, not just beyond their relationship, but beyond the very idea of her, and in doing so, he became more attractive and intriguing than ever man standing in his power, shrouded in a bit of mystery, answerable to no one but himself. Part 8. The ultimate test, when she reaches out. Eventually, the tension became too much for her to bear. She had to know for sure. All the small tests, the likes, the casual messages, they weren't giving her the reassurance she needed. So, inevitably, she reached out in a more direct way. This moment is what everything had been building up to, the ultimate test of his indifference and growth. Maybe it was one evening when loneliness crept in for her, or after she saw something that particularly struck her. But she finally sent a more direct message. Perhaps she wrote, "Hey, I really miss talking to you. Can we catch up soon?" Or even a more vulnerable, "I've been thinking about us lately." It could have been a phone call out of the blue, her name lighting up his screen in a way it hadn't in a long time. Or perhaps she engineered a chance meeting, showing up at a mutual friend's gathering, trying to initiate a real conversation. One way or another, she essentially said, "I'm here. I want to talk." For most men, this is the make-or-break moment, the moment her figurative white flag waves and she appears to extend an olive branch. Many guys will drop everything. All the memories flood back, hope surges, and they think, this is it, she wants me back. Their heart pounds, hands shake, and without a second thought, they throw open the gates and let her back in, often with tears or joy or overwhelming relief. They may even apologize to her for not staying in touch. Imagine that. It's like a dam breaking. Their emotions rush out uncontrolled. In that rush, all the strength they built, all the calm they tried to maintain, gets swept away. But he was not most men anymore. When that pivotal moment came and she truly reached out, he took a pause. He remembered the nights he cried over her, the days he forced himself through agony to grow beyond her. He remembered who he was now. His emotional reflexes had been retrained over these months of transformation, so instead of responding with his old heart-on-sleeve impulsiveness, he responded with measured grace. If she called, he let it ring a few times, maybe even considered letting it go to voicemail, and only picked up when he felt composed. If she texted, he didn't reply in seconds. He took his time. He read her message carefully and noticed something. She wasn't explicitly apologizing or asking to fix things. She was testing the waters, and he had no obligation to jump in. He answered her calmly. Perhaps he agreed to meet for a coffee. Perhaps he simply replied to her message with polite positivity but without any desperation. When they did speak, either by phone or in person, she was likely taken aback by his tone. He was friendly, polite, and absolutely indifferent. He spoke to her like he would an old classmate or a distant acquaintance. Warm enough to be respectful, but cool enough to make it clear that her reaching out wasn't opening any floodgates. He didn't ignore her out of spite, nor did he gush with excitement. He treated her outreach as what it truly was to him. Just another conversation. She had lost the special status she once held, and now she was simply another person in his orbit, someone he wished well, but whose absence or presence in his life no longer determined his happiness. This response, or a relative lack thereof, was not what she expected. She likely expected one of two things: anger or eagerness. If he had been angry, cold, bitter, telling her off, that still would have shown he cared enough to feel hurt. If he had been eager, overjoyed at her attention, that would have proven he was just waiting all along. But he was neither of those things. He was fine, genuinely fine, and that was bewildering to her. She tried to engage him emotionally, perhaps bringing up old memories. Remember that time? Or, I really do miss your sense of humor. Fishing for some reciprocal admission from it. He would smile, say he remembers, perhaps chuckle at the memory, and then pivot the conversation lightly. He didn't reciprocate with, I miss you too. He didn't hand her any of the power she was seeking, not out of malice, but because it simply wasn't true anymore. He didn't miss her. He was cordial, because he had no ill will, but he also had no longing. This was the ultimate test of his growth, and he passed it with flying colors. His heart rate remained steady. His sense of self remained intact. He walked away from that conversation, or ended that phone call, feeling proud and strangely relieved. Relieved that her reach out didn't reduce him to the vulnerable mess he once was. Relieved that he could talk to her without pain, without yearning, without anger, truly, as a man who has moved on. For her, however, that conversation lit a fire of panic. She hung up or walked away thinking, he really doesn't care. He might actually be over me. If she had been harboring any belief that an earnest attempt on her part would immediately reel him back in, that belief was now shattered in that calm, brief exchange. He had unconsciously communicated to her one profound truth. She no longer had power over him. She was now the one filled with regret and second-guessing. If she had left because she thought the grass was greener elsewhere, she was now seeing that not only was the grass on his side greener, but it also no longer welcomed her footsteps. If she left seeking someone better, she was seeing him become that someone, just no longer for her. From his perspective, This ultimate test was like a final exam he didn't even originally know he was studying for. All the self-work, all the healing, all the strengthening of his heart, it prepared him for this moment, to face the source of his pain and feel nothing but composure. He had mastered himself to the point that even when she, the person who once had the power to break him, extended an invitation to reconnect, he found that he didn't need or crave it. The past truly had nothing to offer him now. As their brief reunion concluded, he felt a wave of closure wash over him, not the kind of closure that comes from hashing out old issues or hearing an apology. He didn't need those anymore. But the closure that comes from within. He had incontrovertible proof of how far he'd come. The woman who used to be his weakness was now unable to shake his strength. He realized in that moment that his journey of healing was essentially complete. The chains were off, the wounds had scarred over, and he was free. For her, ironically, a new kind of chain had begun to form, a chain of regret and what-ifs. But that was no longer his concern. The ultimate test had a clear result. He passed, and once you pass this kind of test, you never go back to being the person you were. He certainly wasn't going back. Why would he? The future he was headed toward was so much brighter than the past he left behind. Part 9. The final shift, becoming truly unbreakable. There comes a point in every healing journey when you wake up and realize the past has lost its hold on you. He reached that point. It wasn't because she finally apologized or because some movie-worthy reunion happened. It was because, deep in his soul, she didn't matter to him anymore, not in a hateful way, but in a peacefully indifferent way. He felt it in small things at first. Her name might come up in conversation, and he'd feel no twist in his gut. He could think about the breakup, and it seemed like it happened to someone else, like a story he heard long ago. Her memory had transformed into something distant, almost trivial. He didn't need to forget her, he just found that remembering her no longer hurt. It was like remembering a person he used to be, or a lesson he once learned. This was the final shift. The moment his pain turned into wisdom and nothing more. All those nights of sorrow became nothing but a distant lesson. A chapter closed. He had extracted the teachings from that experience about love, about self-respect, about resilience, and then let the experience itself go. The scar was there, but it didn't ache anymore. If anything, he was oddly grateful for it, because without that pain, he might never have pushed himself to become this new man. He realized he didn't care if she regretted losing him or not. It no longer mattered whether she thought about him at midnight or never at all. It didn't concern him if she saw how well he was doing, or if she continued on with her life oblivious. He had zero interest in measuring his worth against her reactions. He was simply too busy living. His life was full of goals, of opportunities, of present moments that deserved his attention. He had stepped fully into his own, and it was liberating beyond words. And here's the kicker, that was the thing that, in the end, truly broke her. Not the silence, not the subtle confidence, but the complete and utter irrevocability of his indifference. The realization on her end that she could scream, cry, apologize, or reminisce, and none of it would penetrate the fortress of self-contentment he had built. She finally understood that she had no effect on him anymore. The last string tying him to her had snapped, and he was soaring, untethered. She had once thought, perhaps, that eventually she'd have the option to stroll back into his life. Maybe she imagined that even years later, she could call him, and he'd answer with that same loving tone, harboring that little ember of hope for her. But now, looking at him, she knew the door was not just closed, it was sealed. He hadn't closed it to punish her. He simply wasn't standing behind it anymore. He'd moved on and left that door and her behind in a different world. The man she had known, the one who placed her on a pedestal and built his dreams around her, was gone. In his place was someone who had grown far beyond her reach, a man who lived life on a higher plane of self-assurance and purpose. In this new reality of his, she was irrelevant. Not hated, not secretly loved, just irrelevant. This is a stage where many people falter, because it's easy to confuse moving on with finding someone new or making a show of being over it. But he understood now. True moving on isn't about a rebound or some flashy display of having fun. It's about genuinely not needing the past anymore. It's about finding completeness in yourself. True power isn't in seeking validation or proving a point. It's in no longer needing to seek or prove anything at all. He didn't become this unbreakable man to make her jealous or to make her wish she hadn't left. He became unbreakable because that's who he was meant to be, for himself. In hindsight, everything he went through had a purpose. She broke him, yes, but in doing so, she unknowingly set him free from his own illusions and forced him to rebuild on solid ground. He took that opportunity and transformed. Now that he was at this final stage, something incredible happened internally. The past truly lost all meaning. He no longer looked back with anger or longing. He rarely looked back at all. Why would he, when the present was so engaging and the future so promising? There was nothing back there worth his gaze. The questions that used to plague him. Does she miss me? Does she realize what she lost? Those had evaporated. He didn't ask them anymore, because he honestly didn't care about the answers. He had stepped into a new reality, one where he was the master of his own fate. His happiness, his self-worth, his identity were all in his own hands now, not in hers or anyone else's. This is what real strength looks like. Not chasing anyone, not needing external approval, just being confidently and contentedly. He was living in a way that naturally commanded respect, without him ever needing to demand it. The people in his life now saw a man who valued himself, and they responded in kind. He was no longer a victim of heartbreak. He was a survivor-turned-thriver, a man who had been through the fire and emerged, forged into steel. He carried himself with a quiet pride, not arrogance, but assurance. He had been to the bottom and discovered that the bottom was solid ground on which he could push himself back up. And up he went, higher than he'd ever been before. Perhaps the sweetest part of this final shift was realizing that the story he once kept replaying in his mind, the story of her and what she did and how he hurt that story, had finally lost its hold. It was no longer the narrative of his life. In fact, it dawned on him that the story was never really about her at all. It was about him, his journey, his growth, his awakening. She was just one catalyst along the way. The main character of this saga was always him, and now he was writing the next chapters focusing on things that truly mattered: peace, purpose, and people who appreciated him. He had become truly unbreakable. And in doing so, he found a kind of peace and empowerment that few ever attain. The man who emerged from all this could smile genuinely, love freely, maybe eventually with someone new, and walk through life knowing that whatever came his way, he would never lose himself like that again. Part 10. The New Reality, a Life on His Terms. This was it. The final stage. He had entered a new reality, one entirely of his own making. In this reality, his life was on his terms, not defined by who was or wasn't beside him, but by his own choices and values. He stepped fully into the life he was always meant to live, a life no longer overshadowed by heartbreak or by proving his worth to anyone. In this new reality, mornings felt different. He woke up with a sense of anticipation for the day ahead, thinking about his goals, his plans, the people he cared about now. He had projects he was excited to work on, hobbies that made him lose track of time, and perhaps opportunities on the horizon that he couldn't have seen back when he was consumed by pain. Every decision he made, whether it was taking a job in a new city, planning a trip, or even just a Friday night activity, was based on what he wanted, not on what might impress or attract someone else. He was no longer haunted by the ghost of his past relationship. Those late-night pangs of loneliness had been replaced by late-night brainstorms about his ambitions, or cozy nights of restful sleep, the question, "Does she still think of me?" never even popped up, because on the rare occasion he thought of her, it was with a detached kind of empathy at most, hoping she was well, but utterly unconcerned with the details. Importantly, he knew his own worth now. No other person could determine that for him. The validation he once desperately sought from her, and maybe from others, too, had become irrelevant. He had validated himself through action, through perseverance, through achievement and self-love. If he dated again, he would carry this confidence with him, ensuring he'd never settle for someone who didn't respect him fully. If he remained single for a while, he was completely fine with that too, because his happiness was not contingent on a relationship. It was built on a solid foundation within. He stopped wondering about what could have been. He stopped fantasizing alternate scenarios of their past. That mental energy was now redirected to what could be in his own future, the only place where possibilities truly matter. He had dreams to chase, places to see, skills to master. Perhaps he even discovered a passion for helping others through similar pain, turning his wound into a source of light for people in the dark. Who knows? The point was, his life had richness and depth that didn't revolve around any one person. As for her, he genuinely didn't care who she was with or what she was doing anymore. Not out of spite, but out of genuine disinterest. She could have moved to another country or moved down the street, gotten married or stayed single, reached out again or stayed silent. None of it affected the trajectory of his life now. He harbored no resentment, but also no secret hope. If she ever tried to check his social media these days, what she saw would just confirm what she already knew. He was thriving and not looking back. If she attempted one last time to peek into his life, maybe scrolling his photos or asking a mutual friend about him, she would find that he's not just surviving. He's thriving. He looks good. He feels even better. The man she once knew has evolved into something greater. She'd see a man who built himself from the ground up after she left. A man who mastered his emotions, sharpened his mind, and hardened his spirit. A man who walks into every room with a calm confidence, as if he owns the space. Not in arrogance, but in comfort with himself. His presence speaks volumes. People can sense that he's a person who respects himself, who doesn't need anything from anyone. That energy is powerful. The validation he once craved, gone. He validates himself. The attention he used to seek, unnecessary. He gives himself approval. He doesn't need to be seen or acknowledged to know his value. He embodies it. And paradoxically, that's exactly why people notice him more now. When you carry the aura of someone who's content and strong on the inside, it draws others like a magnet. This change in him, it's the part she never saw coming. She thought she could predict his entire story. Heartbreak, some half-baked attempt to move on, and eventually, if she ever wanted, reconnection. But she never expected he would outgrow the story altogether. She thought the door would always be a little open for her, that no matter how far he went, he'd always harbor a soft spot for her in his heart. She assumed if she ever regretted her decision deeply enough, she could turn around and find him right where she left him. But that door wasn't just closed, it had disappeared. If she looked for him in the place she left him, she'd find nothing. He wasn't standing there waiting, and he never would be again. He hadn't just moved on in the sense of finding someone new or forgetting her. He moved on in the sense that he became someone new. The chapter of his life that included her was over, and he had written several new chapters since, none of which had her in them. This was the true power move, although he never framed it that way in his mind. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't an elaborate strategy to make her feel bad. It was simply growth. Pure, honest growth. Revenge and bitterness would mean he still centered his actions around her. But he didn't. Indifference was the theme now, not feigned indifference, but real indifference. He no longer looked back at all. Why would he, when the life in front of him was so rewarding? The past held nothing for him. No answers, no happiness, No value that he hadn't already extracted as a lesson. He didn't need any closure from her because he had created his own closure the day he decided to take control of his destiny. In a way, his incredible personal success and happiness became the closure. Not for her, but for himself. He closed the book on that part of his life by writing a far better sequel. And that, ultimately, is what truly broke her final remnants of ego. Not that he had found someone else. Maybe he had. Maybe he hadn't. It didn't matter to her nearly as much as the fact that he didn't need someone else. Not that he was successful. She always knew he had potential. What broke her was the reality that she no longer existed in his world. Even as a memory that hurt, or a love that lingered, she had become nothing more than a girl he used to know, a lesson in what he would and wouldn't accept in love, perhaps, while she remained stuck in the past, at least for a while longer, questioning her decisions and replaying scenarios. He was out there living a life that she would never again be a part of, and that's something she would have to come to terms with on her own. The strongest man in this story turned out not to be the one who could win his ex back. It was the one who became so strong he didn't even want her back. The man who could smile and genuinely wish her well in life, but not invite her into his. The man who realized that the real prize was never about getting someone else's approval or love. It was about finding his own and building a life so rich that any regrets, both hers and his, became irrelevant. His journey had reached a beautiful conclusion. But if you think about it, it's not really an ending at all. It's a new beginning. Not just for him, but for anyone who chooses the path he chose. Because his story isn't actually about a breakup. It's about the power of transformation that lies in each of us. His journey ends here, but yours is just beginning. If you've seen yourself in his story feeling broken, lost, or stuck in the shadow of someone who left, remember that you have the power to flip the script. Most people never reach that final stage of moving on. They get caught in an endless loop of hoping, hurting, and seeking validation from the very person who hurt them. But not you. You're different. By absorbing this story, you've already taken the first step that so many are too afraid to take. You're looking forward toward a better you. The path ahead isn't always easy, but it is absolutely worth it. Take that pain and use it. Turn it into your fuel. Work on yourself every single day, not to prove anything to your ex or to anyone else, but to prove to yourself that you can become everything you're meant to be. Build your body, sharpen your mind, nourish your soul. Set goals that excite you and pursue them relentlessly. Surround yourself with people who uplift you, and let go of those who hold you back or drag you down. Every step forward, no matter how small, is a step away from the shadows of the past and toward the light of your future. And be patient with yourself. Healing doesn't happen overnight. There will be moments of doubt, maybe even days when the old feelings try to resurface. It's okay. Acknowledge them. Then keep moving. Remember that each time you refuse to indulge in looking back, you strengthen your ability to move ahead. Each time you choose a workout, a book, a hobby, a hangout with supportive friends over checking your ex's social media, or wallowing in what-ifs, you're reinforcing those new neural pathways of resilience and self-worth. One day, sooner than you think, you'll wake up and realize you feel light, that the weight you've been carrying has considerably lessened. You'll catch yourself smiling for no particular reason, excited about something in your life. You'll realize an hour, or a day, or a week has passed, and you haven't thought about the heartbreak at all. That is the taste of freedom. Savor it, and let it propel you further. Always remember, this was never about them. It was about you. You are the prize. When you truly start to live like you are making choices that honor your worth and dignity, amazing things happen. The past loses its grip, and the future opens up with limitless possibilities. You won't need to convince anyone of your value, because you will know it in your bones. And when you reach that state, life stops being about proving anything to anyone and becomes purely about living joyfully, authentically, on your own terms. So step into your power and keep moving forward. Embrace the journey of becoming unbreakable. Every single day is a new chance to grow, to excel, and to write the story of your life the way you want it to be. Let the world witness your silent domination, your stoic transformation, your rise from the ashes. But most importantly, let yourself witness it, because from this point onward, you control your destiny, no one else. Go live a life so full and vibrant that looking back becomes nothing more than glancing at a road you've long left behind. Your new reality awaits, and it's going to be more incredible than you ever imagined. Enjoy every moment of it. You've earned it.